Hello there. I am Taylor, and this is another episode of Power On Podcast. And with me is my cohort, my co-host, my co-worker, cooperative person. Can't think of any more co's there.
Co-conspirator.
Co-conspirator. There we go. This is Sushi B. How you doing, Sushi B?
Very well. How are you today, Taylor?
I'm doing well. Sort of, kind of. I'm getting old. Which I know is...
Aren't we all, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the weather, because it's made a sudden change here, but the ankle I screwed up that happened 7 years ago that I looked into just yesterday. I was like, ugh. But it's been treating me something sour. And because of that, I was going up not a flight of stairs, but a couple stairs. And going up a couple stairs, I somehow got a stinger on my other leg in like the back because I was putting too much pressure on it. And I was just like, man, I'm falling apart.
That's not good.
Right. But I also have to say that today I weighed myself, and it is the first time I've been under 200 pounds in probably 10 years, so I kind of ballooned a little bit there, and I've been slowly chipping away. And even when I was in Japan, for whatever reason, I couldn't lose the weight. Probably just stress weight that I couldn't get rid of. But
But you were working a lot, right? So I mean, I don't know if you're able to give that attention to, be proactive in a healthy lifestyle all the time.
Right. It was certainly a combination of stress, poor dieting, and I wouldn't say a lot of drinking, but a little bit.
Local combis.
Yeah, the combini food really didn't help. Delicious as it was.
Yeah, I lived off that for a little while too, and I was like, I didn't have a kitchen in my one place for a bit. It was just a tiny box of an apartment and no kitchen, so there was a lot of 7-Eleven late night hot dogs and stuff that the average person wouldn't survive from eating.
Right.
The odd beer or two in between and things like that. So, but here we are.
Yeah. I think my metabolism didn't agree with it well enough. Then I had to drive a lot. If I didn't have to drive a lot, it probably would have been. I'd have been all right. But because I was in the car, having to sit all the time.
Yeah,
because I was sitting like 2 hours a day. A lot of times, just driving. So how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Just something crossed my mind when you were like getting old, and not to kind of reflect too much on The Simpsons, but there was I don't know which episode this was, but there was some kind of Lollapalooza type episode, like I don't know whatever season this is, but they had this character, some just no name random character, female VJ of some kind of like this event, and like at one point the studio says something and she's like, for all of us 21-year-olds, and then they like start carrying her off and like replace her with a 16-year-old or something.
Yeah, like at the
with a much younger model or whatever.
Oh yeah, it's like the Spring Break MTV sort of thing. I do remember that.
They're dragging her off. She's like, I'm only 19 or something. Something, I don't know how the gag really is. It's just so stupid though, because it's fairly funny. Yeah, that's kind of what crossed my mind when you're talking getting old, and just how society's kind of that value on youth and so forth, especially in sorry, I'm just drawing a blank here.
That's all good.
Developed nations, right, where a lot of families will start to tend to have less kids, right?
Right.
So that value on youth starts to go up really fast.
I will say this though.
Korea, these kind of societies, especially.
I will say this though. Coworkers and a lot of other people that I interact with on a regular basis, they always think I'm a lot younger than what I am. So, if anything, that's at least.
You look younger than you are. That's
right. Yeah, because they all think I'm like mid late 20s at most. I'm like, nope, a little older than that.
Not bad then.
Right. Can't go wrong with that.
Don't start dating too young, because then
that gets. Well, that's the thing. Yeah, a lot of people that I work with are like
early 20s or something.
Well, yeah, close to 10 years younger than I am, and I'm just like, I can't. You can tell. Like, not to sound like an old man, but like you can tell, and it's just. You just kind of look at them like, what are you? Seriously? I hate saying that because you know that's a mark of getting old, but it is really easy to tell.
That's ageism, Taylor. You
I
better
know.
watch out in your workplace.
Well, no, it's not. No, I'm not saying it's like they're bad about it.
No,
it's just,
no.
It's just you can tell. Right? You can just hear them. Like I can have a conversation with myself and two other people. One be mid 20s themselves, another person be young, like early 20s, and you can tell the difference between the two just from like mannerisms and
the vernacular is not the same.
Yeah, and particularly that I can understand it, but I sometimes
you're not going to use it.
yeah, too set in my ways.
That's okay. That's okay. Everyone's going to get old at some point, or what? So
right.
That's how it goes. But let's get off that train because that could be a topic of itself. But
that is not the topic of the day.
An objective today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's talking about sequels and how necessary they are. Are they necessary? Are they just some evil corporation's plot to rape more money from you? That sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely, well, we'll get into it, but there's plenty of examples of that being likely the case, right?
Right. Because I'd mentioned this topic to you. This kind of stemmed from an idea I had because of the company Mistwalker, right? The old Final Fantasy creators, the old guard with them, they, make a few games, and then they've been making like the online app, or like the app game or whatever, Terra Battle.
Okay.
I think they've made 1 or 2 of them or something. However, I was thinking in particular, not so much Lost Odyssey, because Lost Odyssey has the unique factor of the memory sequences to really stay somewhat poignant in people's memories when it comes to games if they've played it. But the last story, like I had a random urge to want to play it again. I hadn't played it since when did it come out in Japan? 2011.
Yeah.
So I haven't played it since I beat it when it first came out.
Okay.
And it just kind of wondered if it had kind of similar to how like with Final Fantasy, if the last story had even a sequel, not necessarily a direct sequel, but similar to Final Fantasy where it's just sort of a game, if that would have stuck better in people's memories. Or if people would have seen it as just this, they're just trying to make money sort of thing. Because that's how I feel with a lot of stuff now, is if you don't have a sequel, and I think there have been some psychological studies on it, where if you don't if you constantly are trying to make or introduce new IPs to people or new products, it just sort of washes over them, and it doesn't stick. So that's why I think a lot of times you get these remakes and everything, is because they don't want to constantly bombard audiences with new things, because they feel like, or they believe from what studies have revealed that people can't keep their eye on the prize, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. Like, did you ever get to play through the last story?
Yep, I finished the last story.
Okay.
And I remember a lot of people were making fun of the title just because it was clearly kind of an inside joke on Final Fantasy, right? So that's a good question. I guess just to go back to just your last point there, it's almost, I wonder if there's the idea of comfort, right? Knowing that there's this title or whatever, it's like, there's a bit of that nostalgia connection too, right? Of, there was this wonderful movie, book, whatever, that is the same title, and that's the memory I have of that is great, so they're just going to quickly fall into the sequel.
Well, it's, I think, possibly akin to how we think of the cereal aisle, at least in the States. I'd imagine in elsewhere. Japan really didn't have, I mean, to some degree, but where it's just, there's hundreds of selections for cereal, and it's like, we don't really need this. We need you probably get by with 12 different cereals. But
right.
Instead we have so many other goofy variations of it that it's the inundation of it's almost too much for people. And I wonder if that isn't being extrapolated to like series and stuff like that.
Mhm. Well, does that also stem from that fear of the unknown, right? Of, as you said, of well, I'm taking a risk by trying this thing that I don't really have awareness of. And
Mm.
honestly, I mean, how many people like taking risks, and then to what degree?
Mm.
People who get involved in business tend to take larger risks, and will either have great success or large failures. So
Right.
I don't know, but you think about, media coverage for things, oh, there's a small indie film or whatnot, and people that are invested in that industry or in that genre of film and so forth will take notice perhaps. But if it's not kind of in the conscious of everyone, then it's just kind of only a select group of people will identify with that, and if a sequel or whatever, or a spin-off or whatnot comes out of it, then that maybe the fan base grows that way. But I don't know, like I guess it also stems this question when you ask this, or like when you posed this to me, like a few things of streams of thought kind of came out, and one of them was when you were thinking like sequels, like how direct are you talking, like I guess as well. Are you talking about this is clearly in a pattern, right? This is clearly a sequence of events in these films or books, or are you thinking like here's Mario Brothers 1, 2, 3, no connectivity whatsoever? They're all sequels, right? Like they're sequels here.
Yeah, I guess from what I had thought, maybe not necessarily it being direct, but at least using that title, like Mario 1, 2, 3, or
Right.
Or Final Fantasy and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of it feels like it's just a placeholder sometimes, where it made sense with Mario and stuff, is that it's pretty much the same game, just a little bit different. But
So that's Dragon Quest.
and Dragon Quest certainly has that. Though Dragon Quest does have those tertiary connections that don't really.
They're sprinkled in lightly, right? Like they're not. But I mean, you could say that about like a Mario game and stuff too. Like I think a lot of the games will sprinkle in those little nudge, winks, nods, whatever you want to call them, versus a clearly direct connection, right?
Right.
This last thing ended, and typically it seems when a sequel is planned, like and actually legitimately planned, how does that previous media finish? Well, almost always on a cliffhanger, right? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily always, but almost always, right? That's how the hook is. Like you're going to have to come back to this property so you can find out what's the solution here to this issue or problem.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, there's times where it feels like they certainly try to make an effort to milk it for all it's worth. As much as I like the Trails of series, I feel like it's starting to push that a bit too much. I won't go in too much detail about it, but you have like 9 games, and I think it's 9. Yeah, 9. You have a trilogy, a duology, and a quadrilogy. The quadrilogy could have been like 3 games or something, but understandably, there's the way they kind of tell stories. It feels like you could have stretched this out even further, but I don't know. You get to a point where the pacing of something, a little, so like it's like they it's like Falcom makes sequels because they have a hard time of being able to pace things better. I mean, it's not always the case, and I get it, but and maybe it's just impatience on my part. I don't know. To answer the question straight up about it, I feel like they're a bit of a necessary evil when it comes to a company's ability to continue functioning.
Yeah.
If you're like an author or something, or we'll just stick with books. If you're an author, you can get away with it, or you can Stephen King it and have this magnum opus of the Dark Tower and have the filaments all connect in this weird sort of way through whatever's going on. I've never read it, but I'm not a big Stephen King person myself. Authors can get away with it and just kind of write stories here. I mean, Michael Crichton, I don't remember him ever putting some overarching connection to him. He's just like, here's a story, here's a story, here's a story, here's a story.
Wasn't Jurassic Park and The Lost World, were they not connected?
Did he write Lost World? I don't know.
I thought he did, but
I know
I'm not.
timeline. I didn't realize Lost World was a book. I know the movie, but
I'm pretty certain that Lost World was a book as well.
ah.
But basically, you're saying we didn't need 3 Taken movies.
No, we need more. What are you talking about?
We need some more Taken movies.
Yes.
Well, there were several jokes about what else could still be taken, right? Like his wallet, car keys, soul. He could have gone to hell.
Oh, jeez, that would have been.
Well, I mean, they had like Jason Goes to Hell and those ones. I think they could have had Liam Neeson Goes to Hell. I will fight the devil, and I will punch him in the neck, and he will suffer.
Which one was it that had that god-off 8 different camera cuts for him to get over the fence? Was that in Taken 2 or?
Oh, geez, I don't know. I've seen the first 2, but I don't recall the.
It might have been in 3. I mean,
it can't be any worse than Steven Seagal taking those camera angles from really far away and only from behind, because there's a stunt double that will go over like a foot-sized fence because he's so out of shape.
Yeah,
it can't be any worse than that.
It's. I think it's about as good as that.
Okay, well that's too bad. Except I still probably believe Liam Neeson could kill me today more than Steven Seagal. Like if I feel like if I took 2 steps back, Steven Seagal would be out of breath. Plus, he'd be waiting for me to do something, right? Because like most of his training is him waiting for you to come at him, right? Like that's kind of he's using your aggression against you with his Aikido. So, But back to that, yeah, I see where you're coming with the necessity of it in the sense of, again, it goes back to all that. Is it really a safe thing to sell? It's something safe that people will know and they'll identify with right away. And you can still use it to branch out in other ways, like let's say something such as Star Wars, right? You can put that Star Wars label on it and people will typically identify with whatever chunk of Star Wars they've grown up with or know, but they might be enticed to look into whatever this is, despite maybe not having characters that they know. So that it's like that safety, right? Of like, oh, and if let's say something also has a pretty good track record. Personally, I don't like the Metroid series, but most people seem to agree that for the majority of the series, they're pretty well made games, right? You kind of have a quality standard with that title being on the shelf and saying like, oh yeah, it's a Metroid game. It's probably at least so good, whatever your standard is. There seems to be that equation as well. Yeah, I don't know. Does that also lead to disappointment easier than 2?
Well, that or I think you really start to see this with, and I'm jumping back to it, but just because there's so many games of it with the Final Fantasy series, particularly the main ones. I'm not talking Adventure or Legends, because those were huge. Well, but more importantly, those were different series to begin with. I mean.
Well, one was Saga or something, right?
Yeah,
like Saga Frontier.
Yeah, what was the Legends was Saga, and then
one of the Mana series.
Adventure is the second Densetsu one. Is Secret of Mana 1 technically.
Right.
Like in the numerical ones, you had 1 that came out in the West at least. You had 1, and then 4, and then 6. Those are pretty strong games. The first one, a lot of people probably didn't even play it just because. I love it. Whatever.
I think word of mouth when that game came out at the time, I think a lot of people played it.
Probably, yeah. I mean, just I guess for Final Fantasy fans now, they certainly have a different Final Fantasy 1 to play than the one we grew up with.
Sure.
It is what it is. It's certainly a product of its time, but those are 3 really strong games, and then you get 7, and everybody, at least when it came out, everybody seemed to like 7 a lot, and then you have this kind of first stumbling with 8, or at least a divisive one. I mean, you kind of had that with 7 to some degree, but because there was such a great influx of fans, that it sort of washed out people's resentment, because a lot of people seem to have that splintering with, 6 is better than 7. It's a bit more of an undercurrent one, but then it really showed itself from 7 to 8.
Right.
And it's just a further splintering, and then then you get the people who are just like 9 fans who are just kind of like, we like Final Fantasy 9.
Yeah,
It's like, oh, that's nice.
Nine's kind of weird. It just kind of flies under the radar a little bit. Like there are definitely people who are very vocal about it compared to like 6 or 7. You don't hear this conversation of it's the best one from quite as large a group, right? Like they're definitely people championing it pretty strong. And 10 seems to be like that too. 10 seemed to it seemed a lot of people came back to 10, and even though there's the people that do complain about whatever the faults of that game are, I haven't played it, but it seemed to kind of bring a lot of people back. And then I think being the first PS2 Final Fantasy probably had a lot of allure to it. But then that had all those spin-offs that people were like, this is what is this, right?
Well, that, but right, that, but I remember when it first came out, a lot of complaining happened with it. This is the time period when JRPGs really started to recede in popularity. Because they became too extensively dependent on exposition and cutscene. I mean, that's what killed Xenosaga.
Yeah, that first one is horrible. Right? Like, it's stupid. It's seriously, it's just stupid at times. Isn't there like at least a couple of cutscenes that are like 40 to 45 minutes?
Well, what's great about it is it predates our glorious father Hideo Kojima and fucking
Metal Gear Solid
4, right?
Yeah. But at least in 4 you could skip things. In Xenosaga you could not skip.
Fair enough.
You could not. Like, there was no bypass. You had to sit and just let them play. You might as well just walk away. Like, you might as well just go read the crib notes later and just leave it, and then just come back and like, it's gameplay again.
Well, what's amazing about that, I think that was a time where it like had a cutscene, save, and then another cutscene.
Oh, jeez, that's pretty bad.
Like, I like the game. But I mean,
just
like
just
bad
series. Pacing,
right? Right, and
poor choice of pacing.
And it really kind of stems from them just kind of going out of control with it. But I remember
they fixed that up for the other ones, did they not? I thought I heard that far less reliant on that aspect of the storytelling.
And three is, even though they had to truncate everything and cut it short, 3 is probably the best, if not for anything other than just how phenomenal the composition is of the OST. What's her, Yuji Kajiura, I think her name is? Yeah,
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Or Yuki Kajiura, she phenomenal job. Anywho, when 10 first came out for Final Fantasy, I remember a lot of people kind of not liking it just because of all the cutscenes and stuff. And it slowly started to really pick back up, and all the love scene. I think a lot of people really enjoyed the story. Outside of here's some goofy scenes and stuff, and
the plot twist or whatever.
Yeah, the dialogue's kind of wonky.
Doesn't have like some, for the time, like, it was okay voice acting, but it's kind of really laughed upon now, isn't it? Or
I don't know.
Maybe at the time it was too. I don't know, but I think people were excited that it had voice acting, but then it kind of came out and it wasn't as strong as maybe they had anticipated.
Well, it doesn't help that it has that laugh scene in it. That, I mean, somebody actually took all that laughing and converted the Tidus laugh into the soundtrack, like the whole main melodic songs of the whole Final Fantasy. It's fantastic. When you had that, and you start to. What I guess I'm getting at with this whole thing is that the moment that you have a sort of weakening in the fan base when it comes to a sequel, it really starts to rock the ship badly. And unless you can correct it, which I think Final Fantasy IX did to some degree, at least that's the argument I would make. Like, it wasn't one that upset the cart further, it just sort of stabilized stuff. It makes it really hard to keep that going. Like, I think you can, you see it with 12 really, you get some people who are like, oh yeah, this is great, but then they're like, and a lot of people are just like, who cares? And then, 13, you start losing more and more. And
wasn't that weird that I know you just skipped 11. I don't know if that's purposely, but just how...
No, it's on purpose. Fuck 11.
Well, no, just because 11 completely different than what you would have anticipated. It's kind of like what Dragon Quest just throws in, how 10 is suddenly like, oh, and it's going to be all online, and Like, oh, okay. And that also just kind of breaks people's brain a little bit, right? Instead of being like, why didn't you just make Final Fantasy Online or something instead of calling it 11, right?
Right.
That really like throws a loop for people too.
Honestly, that actually is something that really, I've played 13 and I have played 15, but ever since they've done the online thing, I have been really apathetic towards the series, for the most part. I mean, certainly with 15, fuck that game. It seems like as it's gone along, it's gotten really, really...
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the critical praise for, if I recall, for 12 and 15 were quite high. But I don't know from just like an actual user perspective how many people really like those games.
I can't say for 12. I have been told that I would probably like it because it's a little bit more political. Question mark?
I have not played a Final Fantasy game all the way through, period. Like, I've never played one all the way through because I just can't get through them.
Ouch.
Yeah, they just don't do anything for me. We've had this discussion in the past. Like, I think I played all of them from 1 to 8, and I was just 7 was the closest thing I got to the end of finishing one. 7 and 4, and I was just like, what am I even playing this for? Like, I think I've mentioned before that 7 I played up to, I don't know, 100 hours or something. I was like, just delete this. And I just deleted it one day. I was like, whatever. Yeah, I don't care if I see the ending or not.
Yeah, that's...
Like, I had my fill, so...
That's something
but
that I
that's
think...
just me, that for that particular series. But
well, I think it's something that a lot of games do bad, is because they're so long, their payoff for their endings...
No necessarily need you had to be encouraged to go all the way to the end. But there's trophies to be found, Taylor.
Nowadays at least.
Yeah.
But it's just, when I think that's that necessary evil that I bring up is that once you start to rock the boat, unless you can, for lack of a better word, replace the ones who kind of bounce at that point, or get knocked off the boat, the fan boat, if you will. So it gets to a point where you probably should shelf it for a bit, and then maybe come back to it once all the emotion,
the vitriol is gone.
Yeah, I don't want to say like just emotion in general.
It's really hard not to name a franchise that has not done that, right? I mean, we can sit here and list them all off, and they've all had, if you will, derailings at some point that people haven't enjoyed, right? You can say Castlevania, Ys, the list just goes on and on, really. There's only a handful of franchises where, for whatever reason, and it seems quite limited, if we're talking specific to games, right? Movies and these other genres are totally different, these other types of mediums. Like, I would say maybe the Mario games tend to not really... There's the ones maybe you don't enjoy all that much, but it seems like they don't tend to make people like, I despise that Mario game.
Probably the closest thing I could think of is Sunshine.
Yeah, Sunshine is one that I was thinking that might be kind of divisive for people as well. But then they picked it back up with Galaxy. Galaxy, where everyone's like, oh my god, like, this is the greatest Mario game I've ever played. And I think even to this day, Galaxy still has a lot of love for it, right? And even Galaxy 2. So, there's, like, I think to some extent, the people that really like Dragon Quest, that blip of 10 where people who were not in Japan just couldn't play it, so have no idea other than like, why the hell was it an online game and why the hell did we never get it? That's also a pretty consistent franchise of like, if you know what you're getting into, you're going to pretty much get the same beats right here the whole way through, and you're probably going to enjoy them. Yeah, I know some people don't like 6 or whatever. There's I like 6, but for the most part, they're pretty... Probably
the weakest ones are, not including 10, is 9. 9 is probably the...
Because it's more, but it's similar to an online take though, right?
Right, but so many people enjoyed 9 just because they were able to play with friends. So.
Yeah, a lot of people did. 2 is not necessarily a strong one. Like, 2 is probably the hardest one. Honestly.
Yeah, I was to say that's why.
It's just brutal. Like,
2 is an angry, scorned lover.
Yeah, like if you came back after 2, like, good on you, because if you played 1. And 1 is not like all that easy really either. It's not super, super hard, but if you're not really keen on what you're doing, it's not like a super easy game. Especially if you keep leveling up and then you plateau and then you start realizing you're losing power leveling up because of that weird system that they put in place. But it for the most part, it is a pretty consistent franchise, right? Like, you kind of getting the same kind of flow, the same kind of gameplay, the same level of music, like level, I mean, like, as in quality.
Quality, right.
Sorry, not level. But those franchises are also those ones that aren't all connected, right? Maybe that's where those are saved by that. As you're saying, Final Fantasy can be like, I really enjoy 1, 4, 7, and 9, for example, right? You can just omit those ones because they're all their own self-contained product.
Mm.
I don't know. We'll have to get into film because film gets a lot of flack for sequels. Games, you said Trails in the Sky, like that franchise, and how they are connected. But it seems like a lot of video games, they can be, but they tend to take that more of, we're just using that placeholder title approach.
I think the older ones do that.
But we haven't gotten to Zelda with their whole BS of like trying to make a timeline. For what? Like, it's not necessary. You can very much enjoy this Zelda game and this Zelda game and don't have to care that this is supposed to be the great 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 grandfather of Link. Like, who cares? Like, nobody cares.
Some do.
You're just really trying to make up something to satisfy someone for no reason. Same as Castlevania, right?
Well, the some of those Castlevania games are connected. A lot of those, actually, now that I think.
Well, that's what I mean. They are, but that timeline is so, like, it's wonky too, right? Like, they've tried to kind of make it into a timeline, but the ones that they just were, what's the one producer that was working on them for such a long time that's doing that? He left and did Bloodstained.
Igarashi?
Yes.
Or Agarashi? What's his
Koji Igarashi, maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe, sorry. But, he decided, like, well, I'm going to just basically make up a timeline because he worked on X amount of games in the franchise and was like, well, you know what? I don't like Circle of the Moon, so it's just not included. It's like, well, great. Like,
oh, did that? I didn't realize. I'm just more familiar with the original handful, not.
Well, he connected all those, though, right? He was like, well, there is Simon Belmont's in 16 whatever year, and then Simon's Quest is like 2 years later or whatever, and 3 is whatever, 100 years before that or whatever. Yeah. Like, those did have their own semblance of a timeline, but he kind of stretched out to be like, well, Dawn of Sorrow's in 2035, but it's really all part of the same timeline.
Well, I never really played a lot of the later ones, so yeah, I'm not too familiar with.
There was a timeline that was, I think when Portrait of Ruin came out, it actually, one of the pre-order bonuses was a little poster of the timeline, if I recall. Because Portrait of Ruin follows right after Bloodlines on the Genesis. Those characters, some of them are descendants of the characters in that game.
Huh.
Yeah, there's certain connectivity there. But anyways, this is not really important. For you then, do you prefer when they're more of a standalone and it is just that placeholder versus here's Resident Evil 2 and now when we get to Resident Evil 6, Leon is X amount time older, yada yada yada, right? Like, does it depend on the franchise?
I would say.
Like,
it would depend on the kind of story it is. Mm-hmm. As irritated as I do get with a lot of the East games, particularly as it's kind of gone on, where it's like, I get, they're kind of retconning things, tweaking things here and there, and you can kind of get away with it because of the nature of it, because I always look at it as somebody's retelling Adol's adventures or something, so you can kind of get away with, oh, well, this happened a little differently or something. I guess, how to put this, with East it makes sense, but then there's a point where it's like, okay, you gotta get to the point, like that. Because it's like he's had all these adventures and it's been 6 years or 8.
So you want old man Adol at some point?
I think it'd be pretty cool to actually have that.
Big old beard, and he's like running around, and he's got like gray streaks in his red hair and stuff. That would be kind of cool, actually.
Right? Just this very old.
He's got a giant axe now because he's an old man, kind of like the God of War.
Oh, jeez. Well, and that's actually a good example of coming back to it. I'm not God of War fan. Never played them, but a lot of people really took to how they went with that sequel is because they let it set and then they come back to it instead of complete. I know they did it for a while where they're just like churn out, and then people get burned out on
games, and then they had those couple of PSP ones as well, and those were all connected in a pretty tight timeline.
Mm-hmm. Like, if it's following a character, I get it, but there's a point to where, like, I'm of the Hemingway camp that, every story eventually ends in death. There's a point in which a character can only go through so much for me to still be interested in them. Once you start pushing into really, really, like, way too much, like, Adol, it works because there's not a lot of emotional strain being put on Adol.
He's just out for an adventure. Out for a good time. He's like Ryu. He's just looking for the next fight. Ryu is like ageless. Isn't he like 45 in the new games? And he's still beating people's faces in. Did they have that for a bit? It was like sexy Ryu, and he's got like that beard. Did you see that?
No.
I think it was. Well, I think it was 5 that he had like a beard. It's a good look. Like it looks cool, but he's yeah. Anyways, well, fighting games are also a completely different. That Capcom like Street Fighter timeline is also just like a complete mess.
Yeah, I don't understand that. Like that's
just make a fighting game. Like the whole idea of like Guilty Gear's got to have this storyline and stuff. It's okay to some degree. Like it's fine, but it's also like whatever. You know, nobody's really picking these up to be like, oh yeah, like so and so.
I mean, there might be people.
There probably is to some degree.
I mean, it's certainly not for Guilty Gear to have that 3D adventure game or whatever, that beat 'em up or whatever.
Oh, I didn't even know there was one. I just picked Guilty Gear. I didn't.
Because I think
it's like any of those ones. Like
I think it's like Soul Bad Guy or whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously, because he's always on things. But I think you play as him and doing stuff. But
it's probably a lot better than Mortal Kombat Mythologies. That was pretty bad when they tried to go with the storyline. And Mortal Kombat's actually pretty heavy on story now that I think about it. For a fighting game, probably more so than a lot. Like they're quite heavy in their storylines. Like when they had that Deadly Alliance and stuff, and that's a series that constantly finds a way to reboot itself while using its title and keeping kind of a continuity, but kind of finding ways to be like, you know what, we're just going to kind of make this fresh. Because do you remember when they had just that game that I don't know, it's quite a bit of time ago now, but they just called it Mortal Kombat, and this is maybe like 7-8 years ago now, and they had kind of just rebooted it all.
No.
Prior to that, they had like the Deadly Alliance and stuff where Liu Kang got killed like within the first 2 minutes of the story. Shang Tsung just walks up to him and just breaks his neck. Like I
have no idea who you're talking about. Like I literally know nothing about.
So they built like a story, and then I think they just kind of it ran its course. People got so exhausted of Mortal Kombat, right? So then they left it for a while. They just brought it back. They just titled the new game. It was actually I think Mortal Kombat 8 or 9, I forget. They didn't put a number to it, but it was kind of like in brackets, like this is number 9. But they just call it Mortal Kombat. It's basically like a full-on reboot, and so it seems like that they kind of find ways to keep that fresh. As you said, they kind of step away for a while, right? But that's kind of a weird franchise that's been able to do something like that. Whereas, let's say Resident Evil's kind of had to do that now too. They found through fans saying they really disliked that 6th one. The 7th one, I don't think the 7th one has any characters, if I recall, from any of the previous Resident Evils. It's just like a brand new standalone Resident Evil.
I think it does, but like very like there's like one character that pops up that has some tertiary connection, but not.
But it's not. You're not talking about Leon. You're not talking about Claire. Like it's none of those characters, right? It's not Chris. Like none of the kind of mainstays. Is that correct? Like I haven't played 7, so like I'm probably speaking out of my head here, but from what I could gather, they also went a completely different route with not necessarily those characters being zombies per se, but more like super messed up people that have kind of got like there's something else going on.
Yeah, I'm not 100% certain, but I think there's like I think it might be that like one of those main characters reading over a file about it, or was like hearing about, I could be wrong about that.
A little bit of not necessarily breaking the fourth wall, but playing like that perspective of, I don't know, third party perspective or something, right? Like,
I could be wrong on what
I don't know too, but it seems like they stepped away for a while, right? Like the last Resident Evil game was on the PS3 and Xbox 360, and then they just like, we need to step away from this because clearly people are upset. As you said, they need that venting space, and we're just going to try to go in a new direction, which tends to seemingly work, right? When a franchise is really big trouble, you're likely to do one of two things. You're either going to go really, really hard on what really started the franchise. Like if it's a horror franchise, you're going to go really heavy into the horror or whatever. Or you're just going to go like a completely 180 and just be like, we're just going to do something that nobody's expecting this property to go with. Because it just seems like that you tweak, and you get to a point where people are just like, I'm so done with playing what's essentially the same game with these little tweaks that are just not really satisfying. Mario's another one that's kind of weird, though. It's kind of done that for generations, really, and got away with it to some degree.
Yeah, it's like, oh, here's a random suit we're just going to toss in here.
Here's Odyssey, which is really just Galaxy, except now you have a hat you can throw a couple of feet in front of you. It's not really any different. It's not.
I mean, yeah, Resident Evil had a really big one there because they had 1, 2, 3, Code Veronica. Did they have another one before 4?
Well, I mean, you had all of those spin-offs, right? Survivor and all those
Oh, right, right.
Outbreak and all those ones that kind of came out in between. Like, was it Outbreak that was the online co-op one? And I think they had two of those. Survivor, I think, was the light gun game.
They had that one really god-awful one that was... I'm not too... I just know that, yeah, they had that... They really switched it up with 4. Kind of less horror, more action.
And then they did a 3 set of that, basically, right, of 4, 5, and 6 kind of being very similar in that regard.
And they're like, well, we gotta go back to the horror thing, guys.
People really loved 4. They loved the new direction. And 4 still had a fair amount of horror-esque components to it, much less so by the later part of the game.
Yeah.
5 is almost like straight action, and I haven't played 6, but I've heard 6 is pretty much just like a straight out action game. Elements, right? So
right.
I guess back to the question, like, how do you feel about having more of that placeholder versus this is a full on continuation? And you did kind of identify a little bit that you do get that burnout, but if it's just say a pocket of 3 titles of something, and it's run its course.
That's like one that comes up now that you mention it is Lufia. Lufia has a bit of a interesting history with it there because it kind of does the Godfather thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first game is one point, and then its second game becomes a prequel, and then the third game jumps out into the future, and then it just kind of spirals out of control. But because then they had that
Ruins of Lore, which is terrible, and then the DS remake of 2.
The dismal re-envisioning of 2.
Well, those last 2 that came out were not very strong at all.
No, not at all. You have something like that where it just kind of completely screws the pooch, but with Lufia, the first 2 games are pretty similar. They kind of tweak some things for that second game. I can't remember the little monster thing it adds in there. It sort of adds, what the heck were those things called? Little pocket monsters.
I haven't played 2, so.
They add these little monsters that help. They do like actions and stuff per turn. And then 3 changes up the battle mechanics way more. Like they were all kind of thematically similar, not just winks and nods, but a lot of the sinistral stuff plays out, and I guess a lot of themes kind of repeat themselves and stuff. I guess a lot of times that's something that happens with sequels, particularly with games, is that they rehash the themes and imagery and all sorts of stuff that the first game brings, and then they kind of just stay in that holding pattern until either enough people revolt and they're like, okay, we're done with this, or the series just sort of sputters out, or they find ways to reinvent themselves.
Yeah, that's kind of as I was saying earlier, but just kind of tweaking little bits, right? It's weird how sometimes that is amusing to see those little callbacks if you're playing something or watching a movie or whatever, right? Like little nods or winks to like, oh, this quote was used earlier in a movie and then it's kind of used by another character in a similar fashion or whatnot, and you kind of maybe you chuckle about it or whatnot. When sometimes it's just so aggravating. It really depends on your perspective of that sometimes. Because let's jump into kind of like what film does, and I would say like games and maybe television shows and whatnot probably fall into the same trap, but it seems like for a lot of films, there's a lot more times where sequels are so much more afterthoughts. Like they'll make a film, not be so sure how it's going to perform from a financial standpoint, maybe have some idea where you could take this story or franchise, but there's plenty of times where we're going to make this first film. If it catches on, great. If not, we just scrap the whole thing. And if it becomes a mega hit, churn that thing out as quickly as possible to get another movie out. I think you see that a lot with, and then once they get the second one out, they've always got to, like, you see how the first one, it's all connected typically, but that first movie comes out and, it's a big hit and people love something about that film, whatever it might be, and the second one tries to do more of the same but not necessarily anything new, but then it always ends in a cliffhanger, so you have to go see that third movie. Like, do you know what I'm talking about?
You actually bringing this up, something I had a conversation with a coworker just recently. I feel that kind of was the case for a lot of movies, but lately it feels like they are purposely leaving things open to make sequels, especially with like a lot of horror stuff or just like,
Well,
for example.
I don't know. That's probably always been the case, right? With like
That could be
Friday
but
the
it just-
13th. They've had however many of those, and
Well, I mean, how they maybe not even just horror, but like how they end movies. It's like they don't know what they want to do,
right.
but they want to make more of them, so they leave it open for there to be a continuation.
So
or,
just enough, not necessarily a cliffhanger, but enough of like a stinger to be like, yeah, like something else. The evil never dies, right? Can always come back, kind of thing.
Right, and I mean that's certainly been done in games too. But like,
sure.
What are some movies? A Quiet Place, kind of. You could interesting premise, but it's just I don't know. It doesn't feel like they come up with proper resolutions for things. It's like they purposely don't resolve things well enough to leave well enough alone. It's like, oh well, there's still more you could do because the aliens are there or the monsters are there.
There's
so
money to be made.
Right, and I wonder if that doesn't. It doesn't seem to bother a lot of people. A lot of people seem to be all right with it. What's the Bird Box or whatever?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know. The Netflix movie that just came out, where you can't see the monster, it'll make you crazy and want to kill yourself, sort of thing. And the way it ends, just like I don't know. Maybe I'm.
No, I think you're right. I think that might be a typical trope of the entire horror type genre, right? Like, did we need Leprechaun in the Hood or whatever that one was? Like,
oh dear goodness, a Leprechaun in space.
Yeah, I think it went Leprechaun in space, and then I think it was like Leprechaun Back to the Hood or something after that. So they always leave those open because they tend to be cheap films to make, and you can make a lot of them and make hand over fist, even though they're because the budget's so low to create these.
Yeah, you just need like 5 people to go, and then you're like, hey, we made.
I think you need a little more than that.
100%.
But I mean, if you get like 20, well, I don't know now without like film sales being all through like Netflix and stuff, but however that looks, but and all that on demand and all that sort of stuff in the theaters. But it just, as a whole, they just seem to be able to make horror films on much lower budgets because, it's just more, again, it's back to that fear of the unknown a lot of the time. And so, they want to keep it open because you just made all this money and it's easy to do kind of thing.
Right. And so you just kind of rehash the
Yeah,
premise.
like I think it's, but I think that's why you see so many directors go through those films too, right? You'll get one person who starts, franchise and has this wonderful idea and it's very effective and they may return for the sequel. Typically it seems like they don't, and that's why you just see a revolving door of like, and then this director did it, and then this director, and then somebody else, and depending on their vision and interpretation, they could be successful films in whatever, right?
Right. Well, other than horror, what are some sequels of films that are kind of standing? Because the only one I can think of are 2 that we've already really mentioned. I mean, I know there's more, but 2 I think of right off the top of my head are things like Star Wars and The Godfather. Like those 2. I'm not Star Wars guy, really. Didn't the first movie, wasn't it not really thought of as a sequel? It was just kind of its standalone thing, and then they made they decided to make sequels to it or something?
I don't know for sure. I think George Lucas claimed that he had always intended to have it be a larger set of films.
Okay.
But I mean, he was only given X amount of budget and stuff, so he had no idea if he would have been able to go further than the first film. So I don't know if like that tag of like episode 4 was always there, or if it was just literally Star Wars and then, you know, it was successful. So he realized he could put the 4 because he was going to make this prequel at some point later on and so forth and so forth. He claims that like he always had that idea, so I take the guy's word for it, right? That he had this larger idea in his mind.
Gotcha.
Yeah, not like 100% sure on that one. Yeah, as for that, I'm thinking of... Sorry, what was the other one you said? You said Star Wars and...
Godfather.
Oh, okay.
Godfather, I mean...
I've never seen them, so I have no clue.
Okay, I know you have kind of 2 camps of it. There is, I guess... No, yeah, there's really just 2 camps. One camp is that the original is the better film. The other camp is the second one is the better film.
But nobody likes that third one.
The third one is god awful.
I don't think anybody. I've never heard anybody really say good things about the third one.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, but were those? Well, at least one was a book, right?
Was it?
Well, I'm sure the first one was a book, at least. But I don't know if they're following books
too
after.
Familiar. I just know that the sequel for Godfather bounces back between what the events of what happened after one, as well as going back in time to give some more details about stuff. I'm more in the 2 camp. I like the second one a lot more than the first one. I guess in that regard, it can work for a sequel, but I feel like a lot of times, particularly with films, you have to have the idea of it in there. We're going to make a sequel. It's similar to like a book. If you're going to write this story, you're going to make the sequel, kind of have to have that in mind. You can't just be like, we're going to make a sequel now. And it's really the only way you can kind of get away with that and it not be too aggravating, at least to me, would be to separate itself out either by just distance or time or what have you.
Yeah, I can't say too much of those ones. I have no clue. I was thinking something more like, I don't like, say, Back to the Future or the Matrix movies, right? Like, I think the Matrix movies, I believe that first one was just made to essentially be a standalone film, and then it was successful, and Warner Brothers was just like, here's a whole bunch of money to the Wachowski brothers, and it's like, here's a whole bunch of money. Make sure you pump
at least at the time.
Yeah, pump these things out, right? Like get these out and get some more of these because this is a huge deal. I think that did actually happen for that franchise, right? And you kind of see how that quality dips quite quickly from the first to the second to the third in a lot of ways. Again, and not like horrible films. Like there's some really interesting concepts and ideas going on, but like got way too big for itself to some degree. And again, that follows that pattern of here was the first film, and then they were like, and we're making a second. We're letting you know there's going to definitely be a third one because there's a cliffhanger at the end of the second. And I do think they filmed them together at the same time, though. So with the intention of splitting them. That set of Lord of the Rings trilogy was filmed together. So, I mean, that was always intentionally meant to be 3 films.
But they were also 3 books, so.
Right. So there's always an intention to keep it in that format. But the Hobbit ones didn't seem like that was necessarily supposed to happen. That seemed to, like, we're going to draw this out now into 3. Because I think they were like, we'll just make 1. And then they were, like, filming. And it's like, we'll split this into 2. And it was like, well, how can we make more money? Well, seemingly, it was like, that was really a blatant case of, like, it really seemed like they knew they were going to make money, so they're going to make 3 of these things.
Which kind of blew up in their face, I think.
I think so, yeah.
By that, I think the first one was a bit rocky, and then it sort of just kind of clunked downhill from there.
You don't hear a lot of people talking about those movies. Like, very rarely. Actually, if you hear people talk about Lord of the Rings, they only seem to talk about that first run of 3 movies a lot more.
Which is kind of analogous to the books. Everybody always talks about the Lord of the Rings books, but not too much about The Hobbit.
Back to the Future is what I'm not too sure about, because that one kind of follows that pattern too of like there's the first film and then suddenly there were 2 more films that were very closely connected and had a cliffhanger. But I mean, the end of the first film has like that tagline, like, to be continued, but I feel like they put that on after. I don't think that was in the original theatrical release. It's hard to say.
I don't know.
You know, the Indiana Jones films, like Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, and I don't know if they had intention of for sure making those like that into a franchise. It seemed like they were kind of not sure because like Harrison Ford wasn't even the first choice for the character and this and that. So
who was?
Tom Selleck.
Oh dear God!
But he was tied up on Magnum PI, so he
thank God
never was Indiana Jones. I don't think he would have been horrible. It just would have been a very different Indiana Jones.
Thank God.
I'm not going to agree on that. I don't think it would have been horrible. Like, I think if you had like David Hasselhoff or something, would have been a lot worse. I think you could have got into some funky realms, right? Like, I don't know, Frank Stallone as Indiana Jones.
Now that I think about it, I am ashamed I didn't immediately think of this, but Planet of the Apes is a very peculiar instance because you have a couple different sequels. I know the book is different than the movies just because of there's more planetary space travel going on and not just here we go and then that's it. And it like the original book, The Ape Civilization, was very well advanced. but because of budgetary constraints, they had to go the route they did for the original movie.
Right.
Now, Charlton Heston had absolutely no interest in doing a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
But they still did a sequel anyways. So he had this great idea to, spoiler alert, blow up the fucking planet by the end of the second movie. And he's like, haha, there is no way to get around this, because that was something that was really heavy in the second film, was this ever-present, well, because of how they all destroyed the planet through nuclear warfare and everything. They had I think the Omega bomb or whatever, which was super duper powerful nuke. And so he thought he's like, there's no way they can get around this. And then the writers, to their great credit, completely did an ass pull and were able to go back in time and sort of flip the whole script on its head by having a couple of the apes be able to go back in time and see the planet and stuff. Contrivances aside, I like that series because the original film series, because it is cyclical, even though it's got like a ridiculous traveling back in time plot. It works just because of how they play with themes, how the juxtaposition between how Taylor is treated versus how Cornelius and God, I can't think of her name, Zira. Mm-hmm. How they're treated once they're in the human world, we'll say. I don't know. Have you seen the original series, all five films?
No, not even close.
Ricardo Montalban is in two of them, so if that sweetens the pot for you.
I don't know how quick I'm going to jump on those.
You can see by the fifth film they really went to Saturday afternoon kid movie sort of vibe. I've not seen any of the new ones. Tim Burton, you don't count. Get that shit away from me. Go away forever. No. However, I've heard really good things about is it a trilogy?
It's a trilogy,
so far?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it wrapped up.
Okay. I heard really good things about how they did.
Your man Andy Serkis.
My man Andy Serkis. I think if you go about it with an idea, sequels are right when it comes to films. When you start to go beyond what you have as an idea, unless you strike gold with, or strike with the iron's hot and be able to keep those ideas going, it's
when the Iron Man is hot.
When the Iron Man is hot and not doing buddy cop fake Mandarin bullshit, we're all for the better for it. I mean, look at Predator. What the fuck has Predator turned into?
Oh wow, Predator's
a joke.
Well, yeah, they went the Danny Glover route, and that didn't pan out. And that one they had in the early 2010s, whatever, 2011 or something, Predators. It's not horrible. It's not like great, but it wasn't too bad. But this newer one, it sounds pretty dreadful.
It's god awful.
What, you saw it?
Oh, it's terrible.
Like the Predators one was okay. Like it had an interesting.
Oh, not that one. I meant the newest.
Yeah, no,
one,
the newest
one.
I heard it was quite dreadful.
It's that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah. They did kind of take a decent angle, and then they left it. Like, cause I don't know, maybe it didn't make enough money that one, and they didn't go any further with it. So
yeah, the newest ones, they just try to.
Alien's in that same boat too, really, right? I mean, they've let Ridley Scott try to do some stuff, and he just seems to be trying to shoehorn that Alien franchise into a completely different franchise, and it's just weird.
And that's, I think, is with films, when they try to reinvent themselves, like I said, like Planet of the Apes, it took a shitty Tim Burton film and
a lot of years.
Another yeah, about 12 years. Well, because when was I think the last film was of the Pentology or whatever, it was in 76?
Oh, I don't know. Something like that. Yeah, so, probably mid-70s.
Yeah, so they had 20 some odd years, and then that nonsense came out. Then another like 12 years or so, maybe even a little bit more.
Yeah, give or take, somewhere's in that neighborhood. Yeah, I think it was about 2012 or something that new Planet of the Apes came out. Or or what was that one? Jeez, I can't even remember. Rise of the Planet of the Apes?
Might have been Rise. I'm not too familiar
I've caught
with
like little
with
bits here and there of a couple of them, and not having enough time to sit down and kind of watch them thoroughly. You're not catching a lot, but they don't seem bad. Like, they seem all right.
And I've heard really good things.
I'm surprised
about
you
them.
haven't tried to jump on them. How much you enjoy the.
Well, that's I think part of my trepidation is that because
I
I
could see
like
that,
the
but I've
old
heard
ones.
several people say that they're pretty strong films. So, and I don't
Mm.
know if they're meant to be super super connected to that
I think
original
it's kind of
franchise.
its own
I think
its own
it is like it
retelling.
is connected, but yeah, not like you're not damned if you haven't watched those older films.
And to be fair, it doesn't have the ass pull of time travel.
Yeah, they don't.
I think it completely cuts
I
that.
I think you're right. I don't think they have.
Right. With the movie, with the original movies, it works well because of how it all ends.
Right.
And I think it's certainly a product of its time, with the 60s and 70s cinema, of this doom that really, really was permeating throughout film.
No, likely because of Cold War.
Right. Well, most certainly, and it's just almost like fatalistic. In a way, and it doesn't feel nearly as much so with a lot of films now. I mean, you get a lot of apocalyptic stuff, but it's a lot of times it feels like there are the glimmers of hope.
Yeah.
Whereas, it's more of this, like I said, it's this fatalistic, almost impending sort of oppressive.
It doesn't have
that's just looming.
the hope of the 80s, all those 80s films that would come out like Terminator, right? Like, oh, we're going to save the future. this kind of stuff. Well, because the 80s was quite a and I think economically, like I think there's lots of reasons why those decades are so different, right?
So yeah, I think with film it's a lot harder to have those sequels and just kind of be able to be okay with them,
right?
As you can with games where it's just a title holder.
For a lot of them. But yeah, and film has also kind of gone this route of these larger universe things, right? Where comic books kind of are built out of, and even games to some degree, right? Of larger universes and side universes and all this stuff, right? Like Gaiden games, things like that. And now movies are starting to kind of really take over that with obviously the Marvel thing but it's not even just Marvel, right? Like you said, horror franchises. I think there are several horror franchises doing that. There's a monster over here, but there's a story going on in this part of the world that's kind of got the similar monster, and they're really starting to do that kind of thing, which is interesting. But I'm really shocked at this point. Like there hasn't been even more burnout, because even like let's say Marvel, right? Obviously there's sequels, but there's all this connectivity between sequels and so forth. And if they're going to be able to produce quality stories, people will watch them. But what's the word, like, sort of I'm looking for that really explains the kind of that wow factor, that it factor. I mean, there has to be a point when that's got to rub off, right? Where you've had several characters come through and so forth, whether they die off and whatever. But now they're like, oh, I really want to see, Wolverine and Spider-Man on screen. Like that's got to wear off at some point, right? Like where it's just like, okay.
Well, I think it's. I'm kind of wondering if this last Avenger sort of thing will be, because I know they have plans well beyond.
Yeah.
But I kind of wonder how well or how much more staying power that will have, if there won't be a fatigue from that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm certainly not the best person to say.
No, I know it's not your bag at all, and that's fine. But I agree.
Right.
Like there has to come a point where again, it does fall into the realm. Are you, even if they're not known characters, are you telling a quality story, right? Like, are you introducing something that's not just very similar to the last thing, and it's a very quality piece of film? Then yeah, people will probably still go out and still see it, right? And it's still kind of that flag, tentpole type film that people will continue to go. But yeah, there does have to come a point where it's like, well, how many of these movies can you sustain a year pumping out 2 or 3, and they're all connected, so you've got to see this one to really know the little inside jokes in that next one, and this kind of thing, right? Even Star Wars seems like it's trying to back off to some degree, right? Like I don't think there was one as recently, but they were pumping them out every winter film season, and
yeah, they had
that one didn't go over so well or whatever, and
the winter, but then they'd have one a few months
yeah,
later
they did, right? That's right. They had the Solo one,
Rogue One,
right. Well, I think it was Force Awakens. Then I think Rogue One was the following Christmas, so like they were about a year apart. But then Solo came out, I think, just really quickly after that. what was that one? The Last Jedi or whatever.
Right.
So like, yeah, and it seems like, whoa, they found out really quick that those two didn't go over well with people, right?
For whatever reason.
Well, they just probably weren't made great, I guess, to some degree, right? I don't know. Like, I haven't seen.
I would say I'm not.
I've heard that Solo one, like, just it was kind of a mess of a movie. So it's like, well, if it's a messy movie, then yeah, then,
which is a fair,
you know, and at some point you're not going to be able to continue to hit home runs all the time, too, right?
To put it out there, I've only seen 2 movies ever.
I know people
or I take it back. I've seen 3.
Well, you've seen more than some people have seen. Like
Right.
And this goes back to the whole, like, I hate when people are like, you haven't seen Star Wars, what's wrong with it? It's like, I don't have interest in it. Like, it's what is the big deal? Oh, like, you haven't seen Lord of the Rings? No, I haven't. I don't have interest.
Yeah, I haven't seen that at all.
I did because friends kept pressuring. It was like, I remember, I think I told you that too, The Matrix. I'd never seen it. Then, like, that third one's coming out, and they were like, oh, you got to watch all of them before we go see them. I'm like, why? I don't even want to see this. Like, I don't have any interest in watching this. Same as Lord of the Rings.
I fell asleep watching The Matrix in theater. Well, at a drive-in, but I fell asleep with that.
Well, then my friends were like, we gotta watch all these extended versions of Lord of the Rings before that third one comes out. And I was like, I am not interested, like, in these at all. And I've just sat through 10 hours of this, and now I'm going to the theater to go watch this other one. And you're just like, like, because, you know, everyone else is in your group is kind of doing it, like, fine. You just kind of tag along, and, you know, you'd rather be sitting around doing something else.
Well, I think that's kind of the blessing and the curse with. Well, I think it's kind of the blessing and the curse with the sequels is that if people do enjoy it, kind of similar to like One Piece. One Piece has been around for like 20 some odd years, and because it's been around for 20 some odd years, that in itself, you know, kind of like how Napoleon said, quantity is a quality all unto its own.
Yeah, The Simpsons.
Yeah, Simpsons is that because it's been around for so long, and because you know it's just built, and it's not to say it's built bad or built well or you know whatever. It's just simply because it has been around for so long. You're able to really get a good fervor for some fans, but then you just have built walls too high for people who be like, no, I can't. You can't.
Yeah, it's hard to dive into something that's that long running, right?
Right.
Like you can't pick up manga 87 out of a series, you know, and know what's going on for the most part. Like maybe you recognize some characters, that kind of thing, but it's hard to jump in, right? So it's funny because One Piece I tried to read. I actually just recently I tried to read I think the first 2 or 3 of those graphic novels.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I kind of get the draw here, but this is not for me. I've been trying to read those Conan ones, like the Case Closed.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing. I think I'm kind of dabbling. I'm like in the 13th, 14th one, and I'm like, okay, it's kind of dumb that for whatever reason this guy is literally at every crime scene every single time and solves it every single time, and he knocks the dad out with a poison dart every single time, and no one has figured this out. It's like I know you have to have a level of believability in what you're reading and so forth, and I get it, but there are points where if you're not really into something, if you don't like Dragon Quest, and you're like, this is so dumb, like you just killed a monster and you got gold, like that doesn't even make sense, right? Like there's always those layers of that. I do understand that, but if you don't start with something when it's kind of a thing and you're jumping in really late, sometimes it just doesn't resonate, right? You're just like, okay, I'm really far behind the boat and I can't attach here.
Right,
like,
right.
No matter how many life preservers you throw out to me, I'm sinking.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things with sequels is that you get to that point and you're just kind of like, oh, like unless you're like really young and have all that time to invest into, and that's just
you still could have an open mind though too, right? If you're talking about now you're jumping into Star Wars or something, right? Because even that set of sequels, or prequels, or the 1, 2, 3, they're pretty old now. Like if that technology still looks, if you're like, wow, that's really cheesy or whatever, you just, even as a kid, like I think you have to be like super young. If you're like super young, like age 3, 4, 5, where you're not totally exposed to lots of maybe technology around you and stuff, you could be.
Or just cognizant.
Yeah, you could.
This is bad, quote unquote.
Well, yeah, bad, quote.
Or just dated.
Yeah, dated.
Yeah.
You might really latch on to people wearing costumes, right? And or watching a Godzilla and be like, and it's clearly like a person in a suit or whatever. So Ultraman, like that kind of stuff, right?
Oh, Jesus.
Or even Power Rangers.
I wasn't
Still like
expecting
Power
you
Rangers.
to. You know, that's such a
Common Ride.
power. Well, yeah, that whole Power Rangers. Oh my goodness,
That's had several sequels.
dude.
These TV shows can do the sequel thing too, right? It's just called seasons.
Right. They're able to get away with, especially
A lot,
that
actually.
sort of stuff.
Really, they get away with a lot. Season 87 of Cheers. How Norm hasn't died of a heart attack yet is incredible.
Hey, way to go, Norm.
The Fawn's still, hey,
Hey.
he's been wheeled in by like some very attractive nurse that's like
He's jumping over
70
sharks in the
years his
wheelchair.
junior.
Oh, right. Yeah, TV can certainly get away with that a lot more. I couldn't tell you why, because that seemed, at least, that seems to be a bit more of a U.S. thing. I know I'm not too familiar with Korean dramas. I know they're in
You're asking the wrong guy.
China.
I can't stand them, but if you want to know, they tend to be pretty concise, right? They run their 12 to 24 episodes or whatever, and that's it.
Right. Like, I know some of the, like, historical ones.
Some of those
Chinese
ones,
dramas.
Those
They'll
are
retell
those still tend to be, the ones that get popular do tend to be on the shorter end. Like, they don't tend to tune in next fall for 24 more episodes kind of thing. It doesn't have, it's not like, the TV show, like you said, in the States, right, of season 10 of Grey's Anatomy or what have you, right? Like it's totally different, and those are kind of sequels, really. Like they are continuations, but they're really just another word for sequel.
Right. Yeah. They really like to grind those out.
Yeah.
They are the 600,
800 episodes of Friends.
600, 600 chapters of manga is the U.S. like Grey's Anatomy.
Well, and then comic books are kind of in the same thing. Like, would you consider those sequels? I don't know. I guess it depends on if you're considering an arc versus an arc. Yeah, maybe those you consider sequels, right? It's the same thing. And those are kind of never ending because they've allowed them to be. Again, depending on certain, I think the idea of comic book, it just draws people to the superhero, but there are plenty of James Bond comic books that are 4 issues, and there's things like that, right? They're just not really in the public consciousness as quite as much. Maybe a little more now, just because a lot of them are being turned into television and movies like Walking Dead and whatnot. But like the traditional TV show always tends to, lots of them had spin-offs. Like Happy Days had all those spin-offs, right? Like what were they? Laverne and Shirley was one. I don't know. There was a ton. There was I think there was quite a few. And Cheers had a few, I think. Like Frasier was obviously one, but was there not another one or two? I bet you there were, and they were just super unsuccessful. And I'm sure there was, because Cheers was like a pretty popular show enough that.
Well, no, but that was the thing, though, is that I don't think there were. I think it was just
maybe you're right
when they said that there was going to be like a spin-off.
Public outcry.
Well, not even just that. Most people, 9 out of 10, thought it would have been a different character. Not a lot of people expected it to be Kelsey Grammer's Frasier. Now, I love Frasier. That's one of those shows I really enjoy. Yeah, when you watch Cheers.
Well, he wasn't one of the headliners, essentially.
He came in, I think, season 3 or 2 or
something.
Yeah, but I wouldn't slowly build
I don't know.
Up
he was, but I don't know if he was like at the top.
But a lot of people didn't fucking like him. That was the thing. Yeah. A lot of people thought he was pretentious, and he wasn't. Well, he was
even on the show Frasier. He still kind of was, right? Like you get a little more of a character fleshed out there, but he's still not always the kindest soul.
Well, that, but having his brother Niles turn it to 11. It really makes him not so much, and then having Martin, his dad, in there being the regular guy sort of thing, to help keep it much more even keel than what it could have turned into. Right. And that's, and it certainly starts a little clunky at first. I don't know. Yeah, Frasier's always got a warm spot in my heart. That is sequel done right. Do it right. Do it.
The television sequel, right?
right.
But yeah, no, that is a good point though about TV stuff too. And then we were kind of chatting just before we're getting into this, and just talking about like music does some stuff, but you and I are not super versed with that medium. That, like, I think I brought up a couple things. Like there was like Metallica had a couple of albums and songs that kind of were derivatives of, and then I was like mentioning like maybe B-sides could maybe be kind of considered like what you would view as a sequel, sort of, kind of. But
but
music is just kind of
wading
different.
into water. It's too deep for me.
Yeah, it's a different genre that you certainly could do those kind of things, right? It's just, I don't know.
Well, I imagine some of them do, like the epic people, what's the Iced Earth sort of thing? Don't they have stories involved in there sort of thing?
I don't know.
Proto Men do that. Do you know who
No,
the Proto Men are?
I don't.
They basically, working on a third. They've released 2 songs for the third album, but they have it's like a trilogy for their own retelling of Mega Man.
Okay.
I really like the songs, and I think the lyrics are really well done. First one is the city, basically. It's not like the world, but the city's turned to shit. Wily's taken over it, and it's very dystopian. And then it goes through that, and second album is a prequel, kind of detailing how Dr. Light and Wily had this falling out, and what led up to the dystopian nature of everything. And then the third one is supposed to kind of pick back up at the end of the first one, because it's just how the story is and stuff. So now that I think about it, at least I know of that one. I think it's how they've had it planned, but they have done a really good job of, and maybe they haven't had it planned for the whole thing, but they do a good job of, okay, this first one is, it's dystopian, so we want it to sound very fuzzy, sort of thing. But then with the second one, because it takes place well before, they play with a lot of different musical styles, and it's very clear and stuff. And then the third one kind of starts to meld the two a little bit, maybe, at least the first 2 you hear. You're like, yeah. But yeah, now that I think about it, that's the only one I can think of. But there's probably tons of other examples. I'm just not too familiar
I'm not
with
really. One that just kind of struck me though was Jethro Tull's like "Thick as a Brick" album is 2-sided, and it's just an insane project. It's basically just one long song. It's like the first track is like a 22-minute 1-track song, and then you flip to the B-side, and it's like a 21-minute 1-track song. And they are in verses of each other, parts of the song. Like you'll listen to the first thing and you'll be like, this is just one long song, and you're like, yeah, it's just one track. It's the whole way through. And just because how records are built, they're built differently to kind of be that, right? But it's meant to just be one long song, even though the segments are kind of components. There's like here's a 3-minute component of this type of music, and then this and this and this and this, and you get to the end of the song, and then you go to the B-side, and the lyrics actually reflective of the A-side lyrics. Of like the A-side will say something like, we sent our son to war, we built him up, we sent him to war so he'd fight for us, kind of thing. And then the B-side would be like, our son came back to us, we had to re-educate him on it's like this. It's hard to explain exactly. You kind of have to hear it.
Basically, like talking about Vietnam kind of thing.
It could have been. I don't know if that was their intention essentially for that. There's like a whole bunch of just different lyrics that are throughout the whole song. But yeah, it's just, and not even all of them are interconnected all the way through. But like the very first chunk of the song is like a 3-minute part, and then when you get to that B-side or the second track, the last 3 minutes are almost exactly sounding the same, but just slightly different in the way they wrap up. And so it's kind of an interesting project. I forget what he called it. It was just like a total like project idea though. Yeah, just slapped it together, and it's just this one long ass album. And essentially you're supposed to listen to both tracks together for like a 45-minute, just one long song essentially. Yes, it's kind of different. That's kind of an example of that. But I'm sure there's lots of bands, because again, we don't listen to enough music. I feel like someone like Tool would do something like that as well. Like I don't even know Tool that well, but just from what I've heard about Tool and stuff, it seems like they would do something just like that, like really interconnected like songs. And I don't know, it seems like that might be a band that would do things like that. So
yeah, Queen.
Yeah, Queen kind of does,
Queen
right? I mean,
stuff.
yeah, like
not
blatantly or very much like sick. Yeah, not like really like here it is and here's the second. But I think you could probably surmise some of that stuff together. I think Zeppelin, you could probably do that too. But yeah, I think, as I said, we just don't follow enough music to really comment further.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any last bits that you want to wrap up with or anything? Or?
Yeah, I guess if anything. I do really feel that it's like I said before, a bit of a necessary evil. It's just depending on the media, whether or not they can do it, kind of thing. I feel like there's different rules for different media, which makes sense, because I know there's always this constant undercurrent of outcry for, hey, we should have new stories and new things.
Right.
And I think you have to have both, because if it's just constantly new stuff, people kind of probably be just sensory overloaded and will tune everything out. But if it's always constantly the same sort of things over and over and over, eventually they'll just turn out as well. So that's how I feel about it. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, it is nice to, when you find something you really enjoy and you see that you may be able to experience more of that can be really exciting, right? Like if, and again, just as much as you can get an excitement, it can be disappointing too, really. Yeah, it is always nice to get new ideas to whatever extent that looks like. And I think now with, the way the internet's so broad in the way you can get information and content and everything, you are always going to be likely to be able to find something you've never heard of or knew of that will be quote unquote new to you. So you always have that option to do so, but you can always kind of take that comfort of, this is what I like, and I'm enjoying what I like, and I'll continue to like this, and kind of continue to explore these concepts, ideas, universes, whatever they may be. Play Mega Man 94 or whatever they're going to get up to. And again, I think you're right. It does really depend on what it is. If it's something that's, we talked about that placeholder versus a really interconnected story. Something like a Mega Man, it doesn't. For most of us, it doesn't matter what the story is. It's kind of funny that all those Robot Masters have a set number, like this is, I don't know, Metal Man is number, whatever his number is, right, or whatnot. Those little nods are always nice. It's kind of like, they almost feel like thank yous a lot of the time, not all of the time, but just kind of like, we just want you to remember, and kind of sometimes thank yous.
At least just little hooks for you to kind of sink into, and not just be like, oh, well, we didn't even care enough to give you this.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little inside thing for those people that have been with this for a long time, kind of thing, right? A little appreciations in a way, but I guess that's how I feel about it. It's, if you can find a nice healthy balance of it, and just go to those things that you want to stick with, and still venture out a little bit. That seems to be a healthy way of obtaining your content.
Okay, there. Well, that is it. I wanted to say thank you for listening. If you have any sort of comments, please let us know. It'd be greatly appreciated. And that's about it, I think.
Yeah, no,
I don't think I've got anything else.
Yeah, comments, of course. And if there are any franchises you've really stuck with for a long time, love to hear what they might be.
That is it. Thanks for listening, and have a good day.